Welcome to the penultimate entry in this deep dive into the Uncharted series. Today we're tackling the last game to feature series protagonist Nathan Drake, the quest that marked the end of his journey. This is Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. As always, before we begin, this is a deep dive into elements of the Uncharted series. There will be spoilers. There is very little I can say about the development of Uncharted 4 on a technical level that is even remotely as interesting or insightful as the behind-the-scenes drama or controversies. Development of Uncharted 4 began, headed by Amy Hennig and Justin Richmond, right after the release of Uncharted 3, and ran for about 2 years before Hennig and Richmond left the company. There are numerous rumors regarding that situation, such as Hennig being forced out of Naughty Dog, something the executives at the company vehemently deny. But given that nobody has ever spoken candidly of what exactly went down, and everybody is very careful about what they actually say, this likely means there are a few ironclad non-disclosure agreements in place. The closest thing we have to the truth are comments from interviews with Richard McGonigal, the voice for Sullivan, and Alan Tudyk, who was set to play Rafe. McGonigal described the situation as them being busy with their mocap recording and then receiving a call stating that Hennig was no longer involved with Uncharted 4. He says that the decision was definitely not Amy Hennig's decision, but had to do with some internal machinations at Naughty Dog. Alan Tudyk, on the other hand, said he had been cast in a role, and when the leadership in the project changed, it made his contract null and void. Not to mention, they had decided to go in a very different direction, so he left, as did Todd Stashwick, who had been cast to play Sam Drake. In Tudyk's own words, "Yeah, we're gonna leave now. Y'all are making some weird changes, we're gonna leave." Warren Cole replaced Tudyk as Rafe, and Troy Baker played Sam in the final version of the game. The changes mentioned come from the fact that the new people in charge, who were also the duo behind The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley, threw out the previous story and rewrote it from scratch, which of course meant that 8 months of recording had to be completely scrapped. And given the cooperative nature of Naughty Dog's development, where everything is done in tandem and feeding into one another, this likely meant that a lot of the game's developed sections had to be scrapped or repurposed as well. After all, you can't keep a level about story beat A if said beat is no longer in the script. In an interview many years later, Amy Hennig said that the version we have of Uncharted 4 shares some of the same DNA, such as the hunt for Henry Avery's mythical treasure, the pirate colony, and so on, but her version would have been a return to something more like Uncharted 1, with the pirate colony being like the forgotten Spanish colony we explore in that title, the primary location for most of the game, wherein the cast will be piecing together the mystery. Not only that, but Sam's role would have been much more antagonistic, a shadow from Drake's past now resurfacing. A key aspect is that Hennig described Uncharted 4 as a return to form, and some sources indicate the game would have been open-ended in the same way the previous titles were. But when Druckmann and Straley took over, the focus shifted to making it the final installment instead. The original would have Charlie Cutter, played by Graham McTavish, in a prominent role, a core character of the story, while the final version had the character Nadine Ross instead, played by Laura Bailey, a casting choice that drew some criticism when it was announced. Druckmann and Straley also added flashback sequences to convey the story, while those were not in Amy Hennig's version of the title. In terms of game mechanics, to mention something, Uncharted 4 added the grappling hook, which in Uncharted 2 is present in a single level and mostly handled by Tenzin. In an interview, Amy Hennig mentioned that they had always enjoyed the rope climbing and vine swinging parts of other Uncharted, and just thought, what if Nathan just had that in his pocket? Likely due to the restarted development and a rushed pace, with reports of extensive crunch and terrible working hours, some of the combat elements were vastly simplified. Melee combat lost the counter mechanics introduced between Uncharted 2 and 3, so now Nathan only just throws punches, seemingly getting worse at fighting, breaking a tradition that had been set by previous entries. where the team upgraded Nathan's moves to account for his growing experience. In a similar way, the grenade return feature was also scrapped, returning the players to the way it works in Uncharted 1 and 2, where you just, gotta run and avoid the grenades. But while those elements were cut, other narrative elements made it in, such as optional conversations with characters, a feature seen in The Last of Us, not to mention systems to handle dialogue being interrupted by player actions, something that happens quite often as conversations are interrupted by combat or the players leaving a vehicle. Uncharted 4 released in 2016 to universal acclaim. With the overwhelmingly positive reception for Uncharted 4, this is gonna sound strange, perhaps even controversial, but for how good a game Uncharted 4 is as a game, it's a terrible Uncharted entry. It's a story that only works because the people in it are actively acting against their own best interests, and seemingly ignores that the characters live in a modern world and have access to the internet, unless it's convenient for the plot. It's the kind of plot that would need to be set in an age before the internet or in a post-apocalyptic landscape to actually work. But I'll elaborate as we go. As with all entries in the series so far, the game opens with a quote, "I am a man of fortune, and I must seek my fortune." Henry Avery. This quote comes from a witness statement during the trial of the mutineers that aided Avery in taking over the Charles II, the warship Avery served on as first mate, and which will become his ship, the Fancy. As for Avery himself, he was never found. Disappeared when the authorities came after them. He even gave his crew conflicting statements of where he intended to go, likely so no one could ascertain his destination for certain. That's actually pretty smart. The game opens in a storm, with Nathan piloting a boat, and we see this is a very different looking Nathan, older and more haggard. As the camera pans, we see another man on the boat, grasping tightly to the side as the stormy sea is making this a very bumpy ride. The other man offers a warning: they're gaining on us, meaning this is not a pleasure cruise, but a chase. And the opposition has come out in force, with all sorts of ships and weapons, even firing mortars at them. Nate calls this guy Sam and says he's already going as fast as he can. This is the first tutorial, with Nathan driving and Sam shooting, but unlike those sections in Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, where you controlled Nate and fired with Elena, here you only drive, at least at the beginning. But then one of those explosions does connect, sending Nathan overboard and damaging their engine. Nathan gets back on board, and we start the shooting tutorial, Nathan covering Sam while the other man fixes things up. We can see the name of a company on the boats, Shoreline. The chase then continues a little longer, perhaps a little too long, but then a flaming ship crashes into their boat, sending them into the ocean and ending this in medias res sequence. And so we move from this scene in the future to a scene very much in the past, specifically Nathan's childhood, years before the Cartagena exploration of Uncharted 3. Nathan's gotten into trouble, started a fight, and the nun in the room with him is not what I would call empathetic. She sounds annoyed, gives the impression that Nathan is maybe something of a trouble child. But as she leaves, she comments on how Nate insists on going down the same route as his brother, and what a waste that is. And she doesn't look disappointed, she looks angry and kinda mean. Outside his window we see a younger Sam, calling for Nate to come meet him, so this becomes the stealth and cover tutorial, moving from cover to cover, staying hidden, all the while listening to the adults talk about Nate. The nun very accusatory, again. Little patience for someone whose job is to handle children on a daily basis. You know, this being an orphanage and all that. When asked by the much warmer and patient priest, someone who thinks helping troubled youth is what they're here for, she reminds him of her opinion, implying maybe sending him somewhere else, but the priest refuses. You could clearly see who Nathan prefers of these two. One of the cool elements of this scene is that you can take a look at the report of the recent incident and what the punishment will be. Not only that, in the common room, there's a board with a star list, basically a ranking of who the better children are. I found myself thinking this was kind of messed up, making good behavior some kind of competition between children, who likely suffer from abandonment and want nothing more than care. Feels manipulative and undecidedly immoral. Nate leaps through a window and the brothers reunite, with Sam telling Nate he has something to show him, but they need to keep going a bit further. The older Drake, though this is not their surname yet, even produces a grappling hook from his backpack, so this also serves as the grapple tutorial along with the usual climbing, parkouring, and clambering. During their meeting, Sam also notices Nate's injuries from his recent fight and admonishes him for getting into trouble. Nate tries to explain the cruel comments the other children told him about their father leaving them here, which we already knew from Uncharted 3 when Marlowe is reading Nate's file to him, of their father relinquishing them to the state. Then of course is the comment of how their mother is in hell for taking her own life. I mean, if I were Nate, I would also have started swinging. Just saying. But Sam is the calm voice of reason, telling him they only say those things because they know it affects Nathan. They know how to get a rise out of him. And that tracks. Children can be very cruel. Especially in this place that kinda seems designed to pit them against one another to score brownie points with Sister Meanie. This section takes the climb from Cartagena and takes it to 11, to the point where the Drake brothers could have easily gone into gymnastics and have enough skill to make it to the Olympics. They jump farther and climb faster than most adults. It stretches the bounds of credulity, but it's a lot of fun. Once they're off the property, Sam shows Nate his new bike and Nathan loves it, both gushing about the specs of it. But it's really just Sam buttering him up to let him down easy, and Nathan sees through it. He's leaving town on a job for about a year and then he'll be back, he says. But Nate's not having it, accusing Sam of abandoning him, implying that it's for a second time, after leaving him in the orphanage and not taking him along when he left. Though to be fair, the reality of it is that Sam likely wouldn't have been able to get custody of his brother upon turning 18, but Nathan doesn't understand those things and only sees it as another family member leaving him behind. Again. And it makes sense. But Sam is trying to defuse the situation, and here he makes a strange comment saying, in a couple of years, when you're out of here, which would logically mean once Nathan is of age, meaning 18. But this is before Cartagena, and Nathan was just a little bit older than this moment. So either Nathan just had a baby face and didn't get a growth spurt until much after his 18th birthday, making him 16 here, or the math is off and the writing with it. Granted, could be just Sam hand-waving the exact number in the way we all use a couple to mean more than two. But I leave that to your decision. It's just weird phrasing is what I'm saying. Nathan tells him to take him along, but Sam says he can't. He can barely support himself, even when Nate tells him he will help, he'll pitch in. But Sam refuses and tells him that despite his feelings on the orphanage, it's the best place for him now. Nate sulks, saying it's not fair. But Sam replies that nothing in their lives has been fair, but it's just another thing they'll have to make work. And this line reminds me of Sullivan's sentiment at the end of Uncharted 3. You can't choose where or how you start. Real greatness is what you do with the hand you're dealt. But Sam's not done with the surprises and has another one for Nate. And we can all tell he kept this as a second thing to bring up to Nathan if the news of him leaving caused any arguments. It is that he found their mother's things that their father sold, and it's all somewhere on the other side of town, and he proposes to Nathan that they go get it, with the younger brother agreeing and both of them riding into the night on Sam's bike. Cutting immediately to a few years later, and Nate's having a yard brawl with a fellow inmate in a Panamanian prison. A nice callback, for me, to the start of Uncharted 1, where Nathan tells Elena they don't have the permits for getting Sir Drake's sunken coffin, and how they really don't want to see the inside of a Panamanian jail. The fight gets more and more desperate until it's broken up by the guards. They drag Nathan away and toss him into solitary confinement, only for the warden to come in later, cuffing him and dragging him through different halls and corridors where some human rights violations, a lot of them, are casually taking place. Their little journey takes them to older, abandoned sections of the prison and to an open space with a cliffside tower, an old pirate jail. Nate asks the warden, Vargas, to take the cuffs off, but he doesn't immediately, so you know something's up. The warden says, I want in. He wants a cut for his help in all of this, with whatever it is they're hoping to find in the tower. Nathan tells him that's not the deal, but Vargas, and I agree with him on this, says he's putting his neck on the line. Nathan tries to argue that Vargas is getting paid very well by Rafe, a new name, for his troubles. Vargas agrees and proves he's not an idiot by showing Nate a manila envelope holding some old documents. Correspondence meant only for whatever crew Nate is working with. He even tells Vargas that he wasn't supposed to open this, and the man replies that yeah, that's true, but he was also told not to accept bribes or beat up inmates, but he still does it. This tells me that the jail's vetting process for shady individuals needs some work, and not just them, Rafe's HR department needs some better screening for scum. Vargas reads the documents, a journal of a member of Henry Avery's crew, with a cryptic message about bearing his cross and seeing the treasures of paradise. Vargas thinks this has something to do with Avery's Gunsway heist, where Avery raided a Mughal ship, as in part of the Mughal Empire, a South Asian empire, and stole a whole lot of stuff, including about 500,000 in gold and silver pieces, plus jewels and trinkets. To be precise, Gunsway is not the right name. That's just how it's anglicized. The real name is Ganji Sawai, meaning exceeding treasure. The heist led to the first actual manhunt in history, as both the Mughal and the English desperately searched for Avery, given that the Mughals stopped all trade with England until he was found, and they didn't. But they did catch 6 members of his crew and executed them. Vargas put the actual value of the heist around $400 million, which comes from an actual appraisal done by historian Jan Rogozinski, but it's dependent on how much the total value of the loot was, which historians say ranges from 300 to 600,000 pounds. It's only 400 million if it's 600k, but even 200 million is still a ridiculous amount of money. All of this is why Vargas wants in. Nate tries to defuse the situation, telling him the whole cross in paradise thing is a metaphor, but Vargas is not stupid, and points out they would not have gone through all the trouble of getting into this prison and bribing him for just a metaphor. Nate capitulates and asks to first go up the tower, and if there's anything up there, that then Vargas can discuss with Rafe and renegotiate. Vargas agrees and finally takes the cuffs, points to where the grappling hook Nate requested is, and leaves the criminal to do his work. Once inside the cell, he finds the stone walls covered in Roman numerals and zodiac signs, and the letter he has serves as a clue to which of them is loose and holds the treasure. The note itself is a letter from crew member Joseph Burns, supposedly the first mate on the Fancy, Avery's ship, to his son Jonathan. It won't be the last time we hear of the Burns. Inside the little hidey hole is a cross of St. Dismas, one of the 2 thieves mentioned in the account of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, also known as the penitent thief or the good thief. The crucifix is broken, the bottom removed, and it's hollow, meaning it could have been a reliquary of some kind. Well, technically it's not a crucifix, it's not a depiction of Jesus. On the back it bears the inscription Digna Pactis Recipimus, meaning we receive what our deeds are worth. Nate pockets the cross, then once back with Vargas, he convinces the shady warden that he found nothing at all, and maybe it wasn't another tower, or maybe it was lost in the 300 years since the letter was written. To further sell the point, Nate asks Vargas about blueprints, plans for the place, to put the man on a wild goose chase, thinking there may be somewhere else they could look. In the meantime, Nate says he'll talk to Sam, their Avery expert. I like this bit of dialogue as it really shines a light on how clever and charming Nate can be. Through this entire thing, he kept Vargas as an ally, not giving anything away and letting the man think there is still a shot to make some riches. And it works. Vargas agrees to look through the files and takes Nathan back to the yard. Nathan finds Sam, who's pleasing everybody while gambling, but makes a good political move and gives most of his cigarette winnings back to them, decreasing the chances of getting shanked by a fair margin. Nate fills him in, then complains about Rafe, how they don't need him. But Sam, again the voice of reason, tells him that they need Rafe, that without him there was no getting into the prison, or out, or even bribing Vargas. To the mention of the guard's name, Nathan says they have a problem, and this is where Rafe Adler makes an entrance, asking what the problem is. And I gotta say it, I hate Rafe. From his whiny voice, to his whiny motives, to everything else about him. But we'll get to a lot of that later. Nate tells him that Vargas read the letter, and so he knows everything and wants a cut. Rafe is annoyed, but when Sam expresses his concerns, Rafe waves him off, telling him that he'll talk to Vargas and resolve the situation. The trio heads somewhere more private, and Nate shows them the cross, and they go over who Dismas is, and Sam figures on how it connects to their quest. How there's a Cathedral of St. Dismas in Scotland, with Nate pointing that Scotland was the last place anyone saw Henry Avery. Rafe is very pleased, even tells him he had doubts about the Drake brothers, but shrugs in a way that says, "But you're good," and hands over the cross back to Nathan. Problem is, Nate's little spat at the yard made him some enemies, and they've come to get their pound of flesh. A fight breaks out, and it's clear how much of a downgrade the melee combat is compared to previous titles. It's clumsy, and for some reason, Nate can now dodge roll away like it's Dark Souls, only without it being even remotely effective. On the upside, if Nate is with an ally, they can tag team enemies. It gives the feeling that Nathan is not a good fighter, like he just doesn't have any technique, and that flies in the face of the fact that before they go to prison, Nate was already being mentored by Sullivan, who's ex-Navy, and would likely have taught him how to fight as part of the skill set of being a crook. Then again, one of the key differences in Uncharted 4 versus its predecessors is how much Druckmann and Straley shifted towards a realistic portrayal, instead of the pulp adventure ride the previous entries were. So Nathan is slower and clumsier, but the hits feel much heavier and solid. Gameplay-wise though, it's a lot less fun. The shift to realism can even be seen in the visuals. Characters are much more realistic looking than before. It's far more photorealistic and darker than previous entries. The warden and the guards come in and line everyone against the wall, and as they pat them down, they find the cross, and Vargas knows they try to play him, and drags them all to his office where he locks the door. Rafe reprimands him, saying that if it took longer they might have died, but Vargas is not in a pleasant mood and draws his gun on them, telling Rafe he might still die. Nathan once again tries to be charming, but this time it doesn't work, and Vargas raises his gun at him, Sam stepping in, trying to do his part at convincing Vargas, but it's not happening. So Rafe steps in and agrees to renegotiate, but demands he lower the gun. At this, Vargas puts his gun away and they start haggling. Rafe goes for 10, which is frankly insulting, Vargas wants 50, which is unreal, and they end up setting at 25%, an equal partnership. Rafe doesn't like it, but has to take it. But here is where A. Vargas proves he's not as smart as you'd think, and B. Rafe proves he's profoundly stupid. Vargas goes to shake the rich man's hand and pulls him close, telling him that if he ever tries to double-cross him again, and he doesn't get to finish the sentence because Rafe shanks him. This dude is the warden of the prison, the guy at the top, the big kahuna, the big cheese, the guy who could get them out through the main door no fuss. And this absolute moron stabs him, because his pride is clearly hurt. Get used to this, it's gonna come up. Worse still, he does a bad job at killing Vargas, because the other man even draws his gun and shoots a couple of times, drawing everyone's attention to the warden's office before Rafe can finish the job and take the gun for himself. Nate asks him if he's out of his damn mind, and Rafe, still flushed with adrenaline, replies, "Do you want to find out?" From Rafe's point of view, he's had an underling get up in his face today, he's not letting another one do it right after. A guy like Rafe doesn't have partners. He has people he can use, and this outburst should be enough for the player to realize that this partnership is far more fragile than it seems, and that likely at the end of the road the Drakes would not survive it. Guards gather outside the office and start working on the door to get inside. Rafe takes the warden's keys and they run out of the door on the other side of the room, and this whole mess turns into a full-blown riot they have to fight and run their way through, heading for the lighthouse. As Vargas had mentioned, there was a boat there. Unfortunately, as they're making their final jump to save their lives, Sam doesn't quite reach the other side, and as Nate is helping him, machine gun fire strikes the older Drake, and he falls, seemingly to his death. Nathan is in shock, distraught, and wants to go back for his brother, but Rafe tells him Sam is dead, and he can either go or stay and die with him. He doesn't wait for Nathan to reply and just leaves him behind, but Nate picks himself up and follows the other man, both plunging into the sea and heading for safety. And this leads us to the title sequence, a full-blown intro, a new one for Uncharted, and which goes over more or less the entire story of the series. We then move 15 years into the future after the events in Panama and 3 years after Uncharted 3. Nathan is retired. He's working for a salvage company, Jameson Marine Incorporated. And he has the glamorous job of hauling a container of copper wire to the surface from some body of water in Louisiana, likely Lake Pontchartrain. He's in constant communication with his boss, and from the tone of the conversation, he's also his friend, Jameson. Once the job is complete, on his way out of the office, Jameson tells Nathan about a job in Malaysia, a shipwreck, that he's got everything ready, all the equipment, he just needs Nathan to get on board. But Nate refuses because they don't have the permits for it. Jameson tries to convince him with how much money is involved, but Nate is firm on his position. No permits, no go. Still, Jameson tells him to take the details of the job with him and sleep on it. At home, he goes over the papers, impressed at how thorough Jameson had been, how much he'd narrowed down the search area. It's a great find, but still, he's not moved to accept it and files it away. Elena calls Nate down for dinner, and on the way there, you can check different trophies from adventures past, even seeing a photo of Tenzin and targets with the faces of older enemies, plus even more knickknacks. Among them is a box with effects from past scenes, the denim jacket Sam gave him as a kid, the cross of St. Dismas, and what seems to be some kind of binder or even album, and sticking out of it is a photo with Sam on it. It's only there for a second, but it's obvious who's on it. But Nate refuses to pull it out fully and stuffs it back inside and nopes out of the whole situation. And here comes my first major point of contention with Uncharted 4, and it's how unlikely I find that Elena Fisher and Nathan Drake would have settled for the cozy, boring home life, where Elena writes for a magazine about tourism in Bangkok, even if she did deviate from the assignment and seems to have focused more on the actual issues in the city, and Nate staying home at a boring job, wistfully looking at photos of islands and uncharted regions. Elena is an investigative reporter who went after a sociopathic warlord with delusions of grandeur, and then she was in Yemen in the middle of some civil unrest. She'd be out there, in wild and dangerous places, and Nathan would be right there with her. These are not the kind of people who do safe and calm, and dinner with the Jeffersons next door. No, they'd be somewhere out there doing what they do best, getting in and out of trouble, just being more careful about how they do it, and not allow themselves or each other to fall into the dangerous obsessions that previously put a definite strain on their relationship. And the fact that Nathan had a brother must have come up at some point. The notion that he kept his existence secret all this time from Elena, the person who's not only his partner, but someone who's seen him at his lowest, is ridiculous, and tells me the writers didn't know these characters very well, nor the lessons they learned in prior installments. Plus, that album was out in the open, including the Polaroid. You'd think Elena would have found it and say, "Hey, who's this?" But this overall is the first instance of something that will come up a lot, and it's the writers forgetting that all of these lessons have already been learned. Also, they can put the characters in dramatic situations where they need to learn them all over again. In this case, it's hiding things. Something that historically, Nathan has always been unable to do with Elena. She always gets everything out of him. But here, Elena talks about her things about Bangkok, and Nate just looks at a picture of an island, losing himself in the image, until Elena brings him back to reality and asks if he's listening. You get multiple choices, all incorrect, about what she was on about. He apologizes for being lost in thought, but she jokes that it was a valiant effort in trying to hide it. Elena realizes that likely Jameson brought up the Malaysia job again, and she says he should take it. But he refuses. She says he could call Sullivan, and Nate visibly bristles about it. And Elena says he hasn't contacted Sully in years. And at that point, I was shouting at the screen that this is not Nathan Drake. Nate, cutting Sully out of his life? Are you high? No! Of all the things, this one makes the least sense. This is his dad, in almost every way, and along with Elena, the person to stick by him through thick and thin. And he's not talked to him in years? No. Just no. Now I know for certain you don't know these characters, or done for some cheap drama down the line. The whole discussion ends on a sour note, with Elena not really convinced about Nathan's reasons for not taking the job, likely thinking he's not doing it because it would upset Elena, and their agreement of not taking this kind of illegal job anymore. She stands and goes to do the dishes, but he stops her. It's his turn to do them, since she cooked, but she says it's okay. So Nate tries to defuse the situation by saying he'll earn it, by beating Elena's high score in Crash Bandicoot. It goes poorly, but that's how it's scripted. It's not actually possible to beat her record here. You can only do so at the end of the game, in the epilogue, where there are enough points to beat the level. Elena lays down some wicked smack talk, telling him to go double or nothing, that her car also needs cleaning. The smack talk leads to banter and then back to a serious talk where Elena asks him seriously if he's happy, and he says he is. Then he poses the same question back to her, and she says, as if she needs to think it through, to Nathan's shock. They end the scene kissing and cuddling. Good talk. The next day, at the office, there's a knock on the door, and Nate calls out that they're closed, but the person is insistent. So Nate steps out and asks what he can help with, and Sam turns to face him, saying he's looking for his little brother. The look on Nate's face is like seeing a ghost. He even says, "Sam?" quite weakly, not letting himself believe. But Sam greets his little brother, and so Nathan throws his arm around his brother, unabashed joy on his face. Sam tells him to take it easy, and Nate steps back asking how it's possible that he saw him get shot, to which Sam shows the scars from the bullet holes. Sam says they patched him up and tossed him back in his cell. Nate says that he made calls and checked and couldn't find any information about Sam being alive. Sam explains it as them wanting to see him rot in jail for the death of Vargas. Nate tries to explain that if he'd known, he would have come for Sam. But his brother reassures him that he knows he would have, but that's not important anymore. What's important is that he's out. And here I have another point of contention. The chances of what Nate is saying being actually true are slim to none. There are multiple ways to check if someone is in a Panamanian prison, legal ways, and even in a corrupt prison like the one they were in, Nate could have easily bribed people to tell him if Sam was there. Later on, it's gonna be revealed that Rafe got him out. But if Nate couldn't find out that Sam was alive, how did Rafe? This is one of those cases where Rafe has a lot more money is not enough of a reason to bypass the lack of logic here. Nate heads outside, needing some air, reeling from this sudden revelation. They sit on a bench, and Sam says he's heard some crazy stuff about his little brother. Then wants some updates, and you get the option to choose where to start the story. 3 options: El Dorado, Shambhala, or Iram in the Pillars. I always choose El Dorado, because it's the original Drake theory that Sir Francis Drake faked his death, and it's exactly what Nathan mentions as he begins to tell his tales, which takes him through the night and into the next morning. Sam is incredulous that Nathan stumbled on multiple archaeological gold mines and came out with nothing. Nate says it's the story of his life, but he managed to get some trinkets, pay off some debts, buy an engagement ring, and then he remembers he's married. He wants Sam to come to dinner to meet Elena, and here Sam steps away, which, red flag and all that. Nathan even has a moment where he realizes, I need to tell Elena about Sam, which again I find very hard to believe that it never came up. Sam breaks the news to Nate that he's in trouble, dropping the name Hector Alcazar, a Panamanian drug lord. Sam says he was his cellmate for the last year, and then goes on to explain how he actually got out of prison. It was Alcazar's people who busted them out, but with Sam talking a lot and saying many things about Avery's treasure to Alcazar, the drug lord has now set Sam on the hunt to pay him back for the breakout. If he doesn't deliver, it's gonna be bad news for him. He gave Sam 3 months to deliver half the treasure, but then set him loose to go do his thing without anyone looking after him? Anyone keeping tabs? Hell, a minor criminal kingpin like Roman didn't trust Sully with El Dorado and came on knocking. And you're gonna tell me the head of a cartel is just gonna let Sam Drake go on his merry way, trusting that he's gonna come back with half the treasure? It's such a dumb story that I struggle to think that Nathan would have believed it. But maybe he's just overwhelmed and takes it at face value. Sam says they just need to pick up the trail, but Nate tells him there is no trail. Rafe bought all the land near St. Dismas Cathedral and they went through it like crazy and didn't find a damn thing, and that Rafe is still out there digging, which makes him about as effective as Harry Flynn, just nowhere near as likable. Sam's not surprised, saying that Rafe is missing some clues, and shows Nate something he printed from a website. It's another one of those crosses, put up for auction. He then says, "It's really amazing what you can find on the internet these days." And we come to the point of contention number, I lost count already, the internet. In Uncharted 4's story, the internet only exists when it moves the plot forward but doesn't exist in any other logical moment. No one ever looks up Hector Alcazar, which is the first thing anyone would do. If your brother is being threatened by this guy, you look him up. You know it, I know it, only the writers seem to not know that search engines exist. They would have found out he was dead and that Sam's story was bogus within 3 seconds of making the search. Hell, it's stated later on that Sully does a lot of his business online now. And you're gonna tell me he didn't look up Alcazar, especially considering his obvious distrust for Sam? Really? Double hell. Sully is a crook and is very much involved in that world, and he's the guy who casually tells the story of how he stole from Pablo Escobar and even mentions later on that he met Alcazar once. It doesn't make any sense that this whole Alcazar charade goes on for as long as it does. It just works because everyone decides to be willfully stupid and flies in the face of, again, Nate is a very clever guy. Back to the story, Sam says the auction's at the Rossi estate, and Nate wants to know how Sam is gonna get an invite, and when Sam says he doesn't need one, nor is he planning on actually being in the auction, Nate understands what he means, that he's gonna go there and steal it. And Sam says no, they both are. Nate refuses. He says he's out, but that he knows people like Charlie Cutter who could help Sam. But the older Drake refuses and says he doesn't trust anyone else. Nate says there's gotta be another way, and here the guilt trip comes, and Sam says he doesn't have enough time for something else. Oh, boo-hoo. And here comes another contention point. Nate calls Elena and straight up lies to her about Jameson having the permits for the Malaysia job, meaning he's gonna be leaving to do that. You know why they have to keep Elena out of the story? Because if she's in, nobody would ever believe that she didn't look up Alcazar and thus dismantle Sam's entire story, cause she's smarter than both Drakes combined. And yet somehow Sully gets called in and involved in this, and he didn't see through it. Not to mention, between Uncharted 2 and 3, Nathan's relationship with Elena went through massive ups and downs because of shady stuff and Drake's obsessions, and somehow they managed to fix it all and still be together. That was the entire thing of Uncharted 3, that those connections are really important. So you're telling me that after all that, Nate is gonna lie to his wife and go on another treasure hunt without telling her, and then keep lying to her for what, months? It doesn't make sense. This is not what these characters would do given the lessons that they have already learned. Not to mention, nothing is impeding Nathan from bringing Elena in. If Sully can be brought on board, so can Elena. Sure, from the scene at their home, we get that they had at some point agreed no more shady stuff. But Elena was on board with him taking the shady Malaysia deal. If he told her, hey, my long-dead brother showed up, we need to do this thing, you think Elena would have said no? The notion that Nate would be scared to tell his wife about this stuff, or that he couldn't trust her with this, is laughable. But she needs to stay away for the whole stupid Alcazar thing not to fall apart within 10 milliseconds. Not to mention, Elena is the most selfless person in Nathan's life. She would have been on board 100% if it meant saving Nathan's brother. In other words, this game is horribly written. In any case, we move to the Rossi estate, which, from looking at the background beyond the edges of the map, puts this place smack dab in the middle of the Amalfi Coast, which is a gorgeous destination. They're overlooking the manor, trying to get a glimpse of the storage room on the far back of the estate, with Sam wondering what they're keeping there. Nathan reminds him they're here just for the cross, but Sam retorts that Nate could get something for the wife. Nate is not amused, but doesn't take the bait. Me, I'd have slapped the smile off his face. Sam is not happy that Sully is involved, but Nate tries his best to convince him that Sullivan will come through for them and open a side window for them to enter the auction, calling him family, something that Sam doesn't like hearing. There's history there, a little bit of bad blood, which again would make someone like Sullivan quadruple check anything that came out of Sam's mouth. But I won't keep going on about nobody using a search engine in the story for too long. This is a dead horse. I'm gonna keep beating it for a while. Get used to it. You can tell Sam's bitterness towards Sullivan, specifically his bond with Nate, come through when, on the way, Nate mentions this is like the third time he's been here, having done some odd jobs with Sully in the past. Sam's replies are curt and stiff. It's pure jealousy. Even before his apparent death, Sully had already taken Nathan under his wing and become the mentor figure that Sam was when they were kids. And he's not let that go. In fact, it's exacerbated given the time they were apart, a time during which Nate's only family was Sully and then Elena. One thing they know on the way is how serious the firepower on the guards is. They're not messing around. Here Sam very much quotes Harry Flynn, "We should have brought guns." And maybe they should have, given that everything will go to hell in a handbasket before the day is over. Eventually they make it into the manor and slip out of their overalls, revealing impeccable tuxedos. A scene that always reminds me of Goldfinger, where James Bond is seen getting out of water in a wetsuit only to remove it and have a perfectly pressed white tuxedo under it. Inside, Sully shares his love for rich people parties, where no one complains if you smoke indoors, and then he and Nate share a hug. A long time having passed since they last met. And no, I'm not gonna point out that this makes no sense given the characters involved. Oh, I suppose I just did. Nate reintroduces his long-dead brother to Sully, and despite their history, Sullivan sounds sincere when he says it's good to see him alive. But it's clear that Sam can't hide his distaste, giving only monosyllabic responses. When Nate mentions the cross, Sully tells him there's something he should see, and he said the cross is the current item being auctioned, and not one being stored for later. So it's right there out in the open. Sully mentions that changing the order of the auctioned items takes some serious cash. And who do they know who's as obsessed with Avery as Sam is and has money to burn? Yep, we're about to be reintroduced to whiny Nepo baby Rafe. But before that, the group discusses options for how they can get the cross from under these 100 or so witnesses, with Sully and Nate coming up empty. But Sam has an idea, and he's shocked the other two didn't consider it, as if they hadn't been in jail at some point. When you want to do something shady, you wait until lights out. So the new plan is to shut down the power so one of them can grab the cross. Nate checks the floor plans and they find where the breakers are. But with a backup generator, they only have seconds to spare. So they need to be very close to the cross to grab it, which would be suspicious as hell. Fortunately, the answer comes to them bearing canapes. Nobody pays attention to the waiters. So that's their plan. Nate will take care of the power, and Sam will impersonate a member of the staff. Unfortunately, they need to get through a security door with a keycard lock to enact their plan. Nate pickpockets another waiter, coming from the back with a bottle of wine, and the two Drake brothers proceed with their mission, moving giant barrels in the wine cellar and even avoiding guards where possible, even doing a little Deus Ex vent crawling. Trust me, no other game series in the world has done as much vent crawling as Deus Ex, not even Splinter Cell. But that's a story for another time, another retrospective that may or may not be coming in the future. Back to the auction, Sully is having a close encounter of the dangerous kind. Enter Nadine Ross, head of Shoreline, a mercenary with a little private army. She and Sully have history, because Sully's got history with everybody, but it seems to be amenable. Nadine offers to get them some drinks, and as she does so, Sully confers with Nate over the comms. Nadine here comes off charming but dangerous. Unfortunately, her screen time is incredibly low, and she'll kind of fade into the background with very little nuance to her portrayal. Now, don't take this to mean that I hate Nadine, like a lot of people do, but in Uncharted 4, she's as background as a background character can get. Very little agency on her own, and given that she's the head of a private military contracting firm, the whole game makes her look ineffectual and just plain bad at her job. But we'll get to that. The Rossi estate, as any property with a state in the name, is huge, and it takes a while for the Drakes to make it to their individual destinations. Damn's easy, he just finds a poor waiter, knocks him out, stuffs him in a closet, and takes his clothing. Nathan's got the harder job, making it to the power room with his reverse Midas touch, breaking every climbing handle he finds. Back in the ballroom, Nadine and Sully seem to be having a good time, telling old tales about the many scrapes that Sully has somehow survived. She asks him when she gets to meet Drake, his partner, but he deflects, saying they don't work together anymore. He's a solo guy now. Drake's retired, held down and married. And here the whiny nepo baby villain of the story comes in, Rafe. And at first, they continue the charade of pleasantry, but you can tell Rafe is faking it. Granted, so is Sully, but he's better at coming off charming. The conversation also reveals that Nadine and Rafe are working together, and she says she's working with him, as in equal partners. But in truth, and for all intents and purposes, she's working for him. Just another underling. She's the Darth Vader to his Palpatine. She's the enforcer. As they discuss the auction, Rafe's mask slips and he threatens Sully, slapping the drink off his hand and even loudly proclaiming that if he even dares bid on the cross, he's coming out in a body bag. This is Rafe. This is the only speed he works in. Entitled, rich, sociopath. Swinging from reasonable in one sentence to unhinged in the other, and his motivations, well, we'll get to those. Mind you, I don't dislike Rafe's writing. It's just that he's in the wrong story. He's the wrong foil for Nathan in this point in his life. It only works because the writers ignore every single bit of growth that Nathan has had over the course of the series. In any case, Nadine stops Rafe and he reclaims his self-control, for now, and Sully steps away, getting as far away from them as he can. Nate makes his way to the power room, but access to the switch is through a locked gate. To buy him time to find a tool to help him break that gate open, Sully does exactly what Rafe warned him against, but it's only momentary. Rafe nearly triples his bid to get things moving, and Sully publicly and graciously capitulates, with Rafe saying it's better this way, otherwise he would have had to kill Sully. Everyone takes it as a joke, but it's definitely not. Just Rafe is so off his rocker, so entitled in his rich kid status that he doesn't try to be subtle. Sully smiles, then mumbles into his comm for Nate to ruin this guy's day. The auction goes once, goes twice, and on 3 the power is cut. And when it returns, the cross is gone. Rafe turns looking for Sully and only sees the back of him as he steps into the employees-only section the boys went to before. Rafe goes after him, calling for others to stop him, but he's making a scene, exactly what the guards are for, so he finds himself with a machine gun aiming at his stupid face. Outside, Nathan is making his way back, but the guards are now out in full force. And I'll give this to Uncharted 4. For all the ways the melee sucks, the stealth mechanics are solid, and it might be the only one of these games where stealth is not a complete waste of time. In fact, this stealth gameplay likely influenced The Last of Us 2, given that Uncharted 4 came out first, and this sequence even features the ubiquitous stealth game Tall Grass. Though there's still the usual Uncharted issue of you finish everybody with stealth and still another wave is gonna pop up, which to me has never made a whole lot of sense. But what can you do? Nate gets back to the library, and here we come to a contentious scene for most. When Nate met Nadine, she thinks he has the cross. He doesn't. She doesn't care and proceeds to lay the unholy smackdown on him. This is what in pro wrestling we'd call a squash match. Nate is outmatched, outclassed, outfought in every aspect. A part of me dislikes it because it seems to forget the wealth of combat experience that Nate has. He's fought dozens of people over his past adventures. He knows how to fight. He may not be a martial artist, but that doesn't mean he's not a fighter. Again, Sully trained him, and in his Navy days, combat training was a mix of boxing, karate, and jiu-jitsu, which is very much in line with Nate's scrappy style from past games. But he's been retired, so it makes sense for him to be slower versus someone who's not only younger, but much more active. My real problem with this scene is that it's not a cutscene, so it gives you the illusion of control, all while being entirely scripted. It's as annoying as unwinnable fights in JRPGs. You cannot win. and it eventually does become a cutscene as Nate gets kicked through a window, only to grab a curtain on the way out and use it to swing down to a pole to continue his journey through the rooftops. As he hangs from the scenery, Sam catches up, shooting like a stormtrooper, and tosses him the gun so little brother can show him how it's done. A little bit more of Assassin's Drake or gunfire later, and Nate tries the old pistol zipline trick only for the cable to snap and swing him right into the ballroom once more, where Sam is being pinned by a whole lot of gunfire. The Drakes regroup and prove that the one-man army thing is a genetic trait, and make it clear that going after them should be considered suicidal tendencies. The fighting spills out to the courtyard, where Sullivan breaks through a hedge with a car for the getaway. At their safe house, Sam cracks open the reliquary and then plays a prank on the others, convincing them for a moment that it's empty. And the only one laughing is him. Sam needs to work on his humor a bit. Comes off a bit like a bastard, and he's promptly told he is. Inside the reliquary is a letter, bearing Avery's mark, the classic skull and crossbones, and on it is a phrase in Latin and some dates, letting them know to look for Avery's grave. Problem is, Rafe is all over that cathedral, but Nate shows him the map for that location, and the graveyard is well away from the cathedral, meaning Rafe has been searching in the wrong place. Remember this, it's gonna come up. Sam is excited about the prospect, but Sully interjects. Rafe knows they're coming. Nate attempts to dismiss his concerns, but Sully insists, telling him that Rafe would want nothing more than for them to show up, not to mention having a full-blown army with him. Nate doesn't pay attention, excited about the prospect of the pirate treasure, to which Sully replies that he thought this was about saving Sam. Nate tries to course correct, but it's clear that he's falling into old patterns. Sully can't understand how Elena is fine with this, and when Nate goes silent, he understands he hasn't told her. He gets into it with him, disappointed after everything they've been through. Nate says she wouldn't understand, and Sully replies that he's not giving her enough credit. Sam says Sully is right, and tries to play the concerned, selfless brother, but as Nate steps away to call his wife, you can tell he's smiling. It's all manipulation to keep Nate on the hook, feeling guilty and responsible for Sam, and Sully notices. Sam goes to pour them a drink, and Sully puts his hand on his glass, his eyes fixed on Sam. The older Drake asks if Victor has something to say, and Sully straight up tells him that he shouldn't punish Nate for him being locked up for 15 years, and that it took Nate a whole lot of time to get out of the whole shady business. Sam retorts that Nate chose this, which he didn't. He was manipulated into it, and that he is made for this life. Sam wants to know why Sully is here, and Sully tells it straight, to watch over Nathan, to have his back, because someone has to. Sam doesn't like that. You can see it in his face, but he doesn't reply. At that point, Nate comes back in, telling Elena it's gonna take a few more months. This scene is the writers attempting to acknowledge all the growth and experience of the past games and hand-wave them all away to force Nathan into old patterns so their drama can work. Only that would not happen with these characters. It does a disservice to their journey. Nate has already lost Elena before for this crap. He wouldn't do it again. Not to mention, again, Elena is the most selfless person Nathan knows, who actually inspired him more than once to do the right thing. She would definitely be on board with this entire thing if the motivation was about saving Nate's brother. Again, she was on board with a Malaysia job, which was shady as hell. You're telling me she's gonna say no to this? Not in a million years. My other problem is that this is a rehash, with Sam playing Chloe's role from Uncharted 2, the devil on the shoulder, the person drawing out Nate's worst instincts. We've been here before, but again, the writers seemingly chose to ignore all that came before them so their story and drama could make some sense. There's also the fact that it's been a few days and they're heading into Scotland and no one brings up Alcazar again. In Drake's fortune, after the whole thing of the casket at sea, Sully talked to Roman and maybe blabbed a bit too much, but he was in serious debt and had to tell them something to keep them off his back. And yet Sam can go traipsing out without so much as someone making a call? Why isn't it incredibly suspicious to anyone else, especially Sully, that Alcazar seems to be such a trusting person, letting Sam do his thing without checking? Now, another thing, let's talk Nadine and especially Shoreline. Uncharted 4 is much more grounded in reality than other titles in the series. That's the intent. It's no longer a pulp adventure like its predecessors. The villains have much more realistic motivations and are far less tropey. The others are pulp villains, grandiose in their own ways. They have their nuance, but they play a very specific role. With that grounded sense of reality in mind, Shoreline being the main enemy in this game makes absolutely zero sense. Midway through the game, they would have renegotiated or even pulled out from the contract entirely. Why is that? Private military contractors, private armies for hire, work a lot like the actual military. They have intelligence people, they have analysts, they do risk assessment. The moment the surname Drake showed up on any document or briefing, it should have not only raised red flags, but make alarm bells go off. In the last decade before this, Nathan Drake, mostly on his own, killed his way through an entire Indonesian pirate crew, a crime lord's personal army, a sociopathic warlord and his veritable army of clones, and an entire 100-year-old secret society and their personal army. Nathan is such a dangerous individual that the risk of this engagement would definitely be more than the contract is worth, even if there are potentially 400 million on the line. By the time the Scotland section is done, Shoreline has already lost like 50 people to one dude and his brother. Nadine's company would be clamoring for her to cut ties and bug out. The fact that she doesn't makes her seem pathetically bad at her job, and her men just astonishingly stupid to follow her orders. Near the end of the game, Rafe will quote all of Nathan's achievements, meaning the past events are more or less public knowledge for the people in their circles. So Nate's kill streak should also be public knowledge. This means that Nadine's first approach when meeting him in that library should have been to put 3 bullets into him, not kick him around. In Uncharted, Nathan Drake is the John Wick of his world, with an even bigger body count. If you're gonna ground the game and make it more realistic, acknowledge that in your writing and make your characters act accordingly. But back to the story, the Drake brothers head to Scotland, with Sully giving them a ride on his hydroplane. As they're talking, you can tell that Sully is about to say something to Nate, but in the end changes his mind and just asks for a souvenir. Maybe he was gonna tell him to keep an eye on Sam, that something isn't adding up, but then changed his mind, thinking Nate wouldn't believe him. I would still have told him. Better yet, I'd have told him, have you Googled Alcazar? While they walk and talk, Sam asks what happened with Rafe, and Nate tells him they fell out, got sick of each other, and that he was certain that by the time they split ways, Rafe was likely getting ready to kill him. He then warns Sam that Rafe is much worse than when they knew him, that he's heard some stories. Sam has heard some too, and so he's cool with screwing with him. Funnily enough, Rafe has also heard stories about Nate, and it's a wonder that he's not peeing his pants at the mere thought of Nathan Drake. But their brotherly chat is cut short when they drop down a ledge and see some shoreline gear, and then some shoreline gunfire. Apparently, Rafe's been expanding the coverage of his expedition, and this is the likely scenario from the dynamite found in this section, which of course leads to the obligatory grenade tutorial, where you destroy the environment and tear enemies to pieces. Business as usual for Nathan. Along the way, Sam wonders if this is what Nate's been up to all these years, jumping around ruins, and Nate says, yeah, but also beaten, knifed, shot at, blown up, drugged. It's a wild ride, and he's still around, last man standing, with a pile of bodies under his feet. You'd think that would give people pause. Starting from this level, you can get a new type of collectible. Some of them you obtain from just playing the story, while others are optional. Journal entries, with Nate scribbling things into his notes. I will commend the developers to sticking to the type of shorthand notes that Nate has always had in his journals. Just clues on where to go or what to do, and didn't delve into having Nate write long explorations of his psyche. Because there is a temptation to do that, but it doesn't fit. so good on them. The brothers are looking for a grave bearing specific markings, skull and crossbones, and the dates on the note, Avery's birth and death years. And finally they find the grave of Benjamin Bridgman, one of Avery's aliases. The skull on it is a switch that reminds me a lot of the skull switches in Doom Eternal. This opens a secret staircase to an underground chamber where they find the statues of Jesus Christ, Dismas, and Gestas, the penitent and mocking thieves on Christ's left and right respectively. These are part of a puzzle used to find a way to open a door behind them, which leads to a viewpoint with a glass edge to mark 3 crosses in the distance, plus the entrance to a cave, the next leg of their journey. As it's Uncharted, it's never easy and the treasure is never just there. Back outside, Shoreline's moved into the area, meaning Nadine needs to lose a few more employees, as Sam and Nate liquidate some of her assets. Moving along caves and cliffs and ruins, and putting a few more guards in permanent radio silence, Sam drops a line that is perhaps the most accurate thing ever said in an Uncharted game, and I consider it the writers acknowledging the reverse Midas touch, as Sam tells Nate he has a knack for breaking things. He certainly does, doesn't he? Inside that cave, they find a full-blown initiation system, with trapped switches and even water wheel puzzles with the same crucifixion iconography. Not only that, but there are pirate sigils that are not Avery's, such as Thomas II, the Rhode Island pirate, another major pirate during Avery's time. In fact, he died in a joint pirate operation, the same attack on Mughal vessels that landed Avery his biggest booty. He apparently died dismembered by cannon fire. Of course, that's not exactly what happened in Uncharted 4's revised history, though it's news to Sam, who very much relays the same information I just did. Above them, they can hear the explosions from Shoreline's aggressive archaeology efforts, the cave itself shaking, and further down the line, they find a gap in a wall, and much like Nate heard Roman and Navarro talking from his little cubbyhole in the catacombs, this time the two Drakes hear as Nadine and Rafe disagree about archaeological methodology. Rafe hates that they're blowing the place to bits before he can analyze anything, and Nadine's tired of doing it the slow way, not to mention she wanted to get the damn cross before it even got to the auction. Rafe tries to defend himself, saying he didn't know he would show up, possibly meaning Nathan or maybe Sam, but Nadine counters that maybe Rafe just wanted to draw him out because he needs the other person's help. Rafe is flustered and getting angry, but Nadine calmly just tells him it's not personal. He appears calm, but you can tell the storm brewing inside of him. If this were a Telltale game, Rafe will remember this, would have appeared at the top of the screen. This is a pretty good scene, shows how the partnership is not as solid as they may claim, and sets up future betrayal, but it also has issues. Specifically, it's the whole "I didn't know he would show up." Sam confirms that Rafe means drawing Nate out. Rafe is the dude that got Sam out in the first place, so when Sam split, where did Rafe think Sam would go? To his damn brother! The Drakes, who becoming part of this whole nonsense, should have been the most obvious thing ever. The only reason they act this way in this scene is to hide the fact that they're the ones who got Sam out of prison, to keep up the whole Alcazar charade the game has going on. But it doesn't make sense in the context of the full story. At the end of the pirate obstacle course, and accounting for the reverse Midas touch, they come to a domed chamber with just a scale in the middle, a golden cross on one side, and a bunch of coins on the other. Nate warns Sam to just take one, as this road would have been for a single person to come through, and it's a test of greed. Upon taking a coin, the top of the dome lights up, forming the shape of a landmass, Madagascar. Sam thinks it's all a game that Avery set up, but Nate's more patient and has been through this before. He realizes this entire thing was a recruitment test. Avery was recruiting, but before they can finish the conversation, they're thrown to the ground by an explosion, and when it clears, there's Nadine Ross and some goons. They have them dead to rights, the Drakes even dropping their guns, but still they keep talking. Nadine radioing Rafe, but not doing anything about the Drakes. I would have shot him. Sure, the game ends there, but it's the kind of situation that doesn't make all that much sense if you think about it. The Drakes do the usual thing Nate does in this situation, tried to negotiate using his knowledge as a resource. The whole you can't find this without a sales pitch, but Nadine doesn't fall for it. So why does she keep talking to them after making them drop their guns? Capture? What good does that do for them? She's already lost a bunch of men to the Drakes. Just pop them both and be done with it. Anything else makes her a poorly written character, refusing to do what she should do for the simple reason that she shouldn't kill the main characters. The writers so desperately want to have Nadine show off how badass she is that they forget to make her make sense. Just have the explosion knock the Drakes, but before the smoke clears, they manage to get behind cover. Still found out, but harder to kill. You could still have the entire scene, but now it would at least make sense for why they're not dead. Not to mention that the explosion happens and the dust and smoke clear out in like 10 milliseconds. And when it does, Nadine and her men are already standing there, as if they had been inside the fireball. Nadine orders a goon to go pick up the cross, not knowing it's the coin that's important. She then notices the Drakes backing away. So she goes to warn her employee, but it's too late. He takes the cross and the entire room begins to collapse. The consequence for greed. Which is weird that this was Avery's plan for recruitment. Sure, you want some consequence for the greedy, but if you blow up the entire place, what happens to the next guy to come around? This leads to another intense and long shootout, removing even more names from the Shoreline Christmas Party invite list, and ends with Nate and Sam jumping into the ocean and the welcome embrace of Sully's plane, whereupon they bug out with soldiers firing at them. Sully's not happy about his plane getting shot, and he fears it's a wild goose chase. But Nate has a theory. The whole thing was an initiation, to weed out recruits, and with Thomas too in the picture, it likely means he and the other pirates were pooling their treasures, working together, meaning the treasure potentially got even bigger than before. But now they have a problem. Their next stop is Madagascar, Kings Bay, which doesn't exist by the way. It's purely fictional but based on the real Antigua Bay, with the town portion based on the real city of Antananarivo, the capital of Madagascar. But Nathan proves once again he's cleverer than he's given credit. He reminds them that the only thing the potential recruit would have on their way out was the coin, and on one side it bears the image of a volcano, and there is one such fiery mountain in Kings Bay, meaning that's their next destination. Kings Bay is the first giant map in Uncharted 4, a veritable African savanna, where you ride around on a jeep with the boys. The jeep having a winch because Nate insisted on it like the smart guy he is. And as they arrive, it's clear that Shoreline beat them to the punch, so they're just following their trail. This level introduces a pretty interesting mechanic. And it's not just the jeep, it's the way it handles conversations when you're traveling. At any point the characters will be chatting, and if you get out of the car, the conversation will stop and resume from where you left. It makes it so you have the nice interaction between the characters without interrupting the flow of gameplay. I complain a lot about this game, but this kind of stuff is pure genius. Speaking of those conversations, not all of them are of profound interest, but a few are. The first conversation has Sam asking Sully if he travels a lot, and Sully says he tries to take jobs that take him away from the computer. And Sam says he told Nate that he was surprised how much the business had moved to the internet. It's yet another instance of this game acknowledging that the internet is there, just not for anything that might derail the plot. And yes, the Alcazar thing is a dead horse at this point, but I said it before, it's a dead horse I'll continue to beat until it's just bones. Another conversation is all about Sam romanticizing the pirates, saying they wanted to be free men, with Sully kind of mocking him, saying, "Oh, all those poor oppressed pirates. They just wanted to rob, murder, pillage, and do other stuff without consequence. Poor them." And to further beat the zombie horse, the other important conversation is regarding Alcazar himself, with Sully saying that he met him once, well before he met the Drakes. At the time he was still climbing that criminal power ladder, but he was still an intense individual. And yet you're telling me Sully wouldn't have asked around or Googled Alcazar when the name rang a bell for him? Ah! All through this landscape, and as they climb the mountains, they continue to chip at Nadine's forces. And by chip, I mean eradicate dozens of her soldiers. At this point, the Shoreline Mercs would be considering Nathan the Angel of Death and would likely start wondering if they're getting paid enough to go after him. The answer is no. It's a perilous trip up the mountain, and Nate's decision to have a winch on the Jeep comes in clutch more than once, not only helping them climb muddy slopes, but also saving their lives when the car goes off a cliff, the winch anchoring them as they literally drive vertically up the side of a cliff. All along the path they find towers, both vantage points and progress markers, until they reach the last one nearest to the summit, where an underground chamber awaits them, mostly dilapidated, but with a map bearing the sigils of many more pirates and, you guessed it, the clues to the next leg of their journey. One side of their coin showed a volcano, the other side a sigil that could be a trident, the flag of Joseph Farrell or Pharaoh, another pirate that participated in the Big Avery heist, or it could be a scale for Edward England, a pirate who, in the later stages of his career, captured the ship and renamed it to the Fancy in honor of Henry Avery. The similar sigils mean there's two towers they need to find, so they need to split the party. Nate and Sully head one way, and Sam goes to the other. The other issue, of course, is Shoreline, who ambushed them in the underground chamber, bringing back the armored shotgun and grenade launcher guys, who proved to be as ineffectual as every other soldier in Nadine's employ and just end up adding to the decor, really enhancing those death vibes in these ruins. They're so bad at their jobs that they got here first and left evidence of their passing, cigarette butts, preparing the trio for things to get rowdy, and then they blow a hole in the chamber and still don't manage to hurt anyone. In the city, Nate and Sully pass the local market and head to a clock tower, the one in the map, and this level is Reverse Midas Touch, the game. Nathan's ability to destroy ancient structures comes out in full force. By the time he finishes the puzzle, the entire internal mechanism of the clockwork, including the bells, have completely collapsed and nearly killed both him and Sully. The devastation is actually kind of impressive, but it does lead to something very weird, as when you leave the tower, none of the NPCs outside acknowledge what's happened. The noise must have been enough to wake the dead, but the people in the market are just going about their day. But before they leave, there's another puzzle to solve underground, in a chamber they're barely able to reach, the entrance covered in chunks of clock tower. It's a puzzle where different sigils need to be arranged, with portraits of said pirates there as clues. And I love this puzzle. Not so much for its complexity or brain teaser ability, but because they included the mightiest of all pirates, down to his monkey sigil, Guybrush Threepwood, the protagonist of the famous LucasArts adventure series Monkey Island, which has a special place in my heart. This is how you do both Easter eggs and homages to past games. It was Neil Druckmann who decided to have Guybrush be part of it, asking the art crew to create the portrait. He was then told by their legal team that they needed Disney's permission as the owners of all LucasArts assets, or they would have to remove it, but fortunately, they got the permissions. In fact, the Return to Monkey Island developers returned the favor, casting Neil in a cameo role.
You know where Stan is?
He's in the back corner.
The entire list of pirates, aside from two, Avery and Threepwood, are Adam Baldrige, Anne Bonny, Christopher Condent, William Mays, Richard Want, Joseph Farrell, Edward England, Tariq bin Malik, and Yazid al-Basra. Two pirates about as real as Guybrush, likely added because they needed some extra sigils to make the puzzle work. It's still weird though that they went with some fictional pirates when you have so many good actual pirates you could use. Why not use Charles Vane, Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts? Sure, they had careers primarily after Avery's death, but A, the game posits that Avery faked his death, and B, Edward England, Anne Bonny, and Christopher Condent are from the same overall period as Blackbeard, and they're on the list. With so many other famous pirates to choose from, why create two randos? I mean, they're free to do so, but if you're gonna do that, why not add more? Add a bunch of pirates that time forgot. Make it a whole thing. Entire crews the world knew nothing about, which is already quite true. For every Blackbeard, there's a John McPirate out there who did their thing and just wasn't notable enough. In any case, the puzzle reveals 3 plates with partial landmass images, like parts of a sea chart, which Nathan traces and then overlaps to reveal the full image, leading of course to the next leg of the journey. But there's also a skull with a Latin phrase on it, Pro Deus quod licentia, which means nothing, because it's badly written Latin. I've gone through several Latin discussion forums, and the general agreement is that it's atrocious Latin, though the game, and in this case Rafe, says it's for God and liberty. But it doesn't mean that at all. From what I gather, and take this with a giant grain of salt because I don't know Latin, for God and freedom would be pro deum atque libertatem. Licentia means wantonness, licentiousness. Never thought this retrospective would take me to Latin translation forum. Pretty wild, huh? They get a call on Sully's phone and Nate picks up, thinking it's Sam to discuss the findings. But it's Rafe, who's paid top dollar to get Sully's number. He and Nate have a little discussion, polite but tense, and Nate pokes Rafe with a comment that he hopes the other man hasn't spent that much money on all this, because the competition is fierce. Rafe takes it in stride, saying he's up for the challenge, but his companion, on the other hand, and we see Nadine driving the Jeep they're on, prefers to eliminate problems. If that's the case, why the hell didn't she just shoot the Drakes back in Scotland the moment she saw them? She had already made a pretty good attempt at Nathan back at the Rosie estate, throwing him out a window. If she's really this ruthless, the boys should have been dead. Again, we know why she didn't, but it makes no sense and it makes her seem bad at her job. Rafe comments on the images Nate was sending Sam, and it dawns on our protagonist that Rafe has hacked their phones. And he says as much, with Rafe retorting, "You stole my cross." I would have had Nate reply, "Okay, fair." Rafe also makes him an offer, drop it all, walk away, and he'll forgive and forget, which nobody believes, even for a second. Nate refuses, but before he hangs up, and in an astonishingly poor villain move, Rafe goes, "You do know you got GPS on the phones, right? Why would you warn them? What an absolute moron! You tell them about the GPS when you're gloating and maniacally laughing after you get them, presumably as they're dying in the scenario." Nate hangs up and calls Sam to warn him, and as they're talking, gunfire erupts on the elder Drake's side. Shoreline soldiers stormtroopering him, hitting everything but him and letting him escape. The call cuts off and Nate destroys Sully's phone, promising to buy a new one. They run back to the market, and this is where Shoreline comes in again, full force, even having an armored car loaded with machine guns. And yet, with all this, they still fail at their job. Nate and Sully manage to get on their car and drive away, kicking off a big, long chase set piece. Nate and Sully lose the pursuing vehicle of mass destruction, then catch up to the Shoreline convoy chasing Sam. Nate throws his hook on the crane of one of the trucks and uses it to get on board and turn this into a variation of the Uncharted 2 Himalayas truck chase sequence. Only this one has bikes and jeeps as well. Naughty Dog really likes to reuse this one, don't they? It's also going to make an appearance in Lost Legacy, by the way. A funny bit about this sequence is that your health only depletes when getting shot. If Nate is hanging on the rope, being dragged through the floor, nothing bad happens. When in reality, that would be tearing him to shreds. This chase also confirms how astonishingly bad Shoreline guys are at their job. They get right up and close to Sam's bike and still miss. I consider this an issue in programming, easily solved if Sam is always faster than them, having a lead they cannot overcome. That way it doesn't look so blatant that they just have to miss. Nate catches up to Sam and the two have a pretty funny argument about who should jump on whose vehicle. But then the gun car comes barreling in and crashes into Nathan. The Jeep turns over and Nate on the ground, almost pinned by the seating and steering wheel. Worse still, the car is catching fire. Outside there are two Shoreline goons discussing that Nate couldn't have survived that, only for you to pop out and pop them both. The gun car is approaching, and that's when Sam shows up and goes full on Terminator 2. "Come with me if you want to live," picking his brother up to ride with him on the bike, handing him an Uzi to fire at the gun car. Uzis, of course, being the one true weakness of these armored vehicles. It's common knowledge. Every shot is a critical hit. The plating just falls away and the engine is left exposed. And when this happens, the Uzi stops really doing anything because the endgame is scripted. You have to reach the port, and then the truck slams into something and things go bad for everyone inside it. Naughty Dog has done the desperate shootout on armored vehicles better in the past, especially on Uncharted 2. The problem is, once you're hitting the engine, it's game over for the car. They take it a bit too far here for the rule of cool. But I'm a firm believer in the rule of cool, so I can forgive it. And things really turn ugly, and it's what all the bad character writing has been building towards. The big blowout with Elena. She's at their motel room having spoken to Jameson and realizing Nathan had been lying to her all along. But first they have a moment outside where the two brothers have the big reveal that all the clues in the bad Latin point to Libertalia, the legendary pirate colony, a place made by pirates for pirates. And so the treasure is the combined pooled riches of all these founding pirates and whoever joined them, making the total sum astronomical. But once Wifey's in the picture, Nate tries to explain about Sam and Alcazar and the whole thing, and Elena is not in a listening mood and then says probably the most melodramatic line I've ever heard, yet delivered wonderfully by Emily Rose. Not knocking the voice acting, just the writing. The line is, "Who are you?" before very much storming out. Sully tells him to go after her, but he's not. There's stuff to do. They're not done. So Sully says maybe it's time to call it. Look for other ways to save Sam, to give him a new identity, but Nate shoots it down, saying that after 15 years stuck in prison, he's not gonna go into hiding now. Then Sully says, go after your wife. Sam and I will head to Libertalia. So Nate replies in a really condescending tone, saying that Sullivan will only get them killed. And when the other man calmly tries to say Nate is wrong, that he's had a lot of experience, the younger Dre snaps and tells him that if he wants to help, he should go look after Elena. Sully drops everything and leaves. Nathan turns for a moment, almost like he's sorry about talking to Sullivan that way, but then just turns back to his desk full of documents. Sam gingerly approaches, offering help, but Nate rebuffs him, telling him to pack his bag. And yet, this is exactly what Sam wanted. He never wanted Sully involved nor Elena. He wanted his little brother all to himself, just the two of them as they had been in the past. The fact that even in this, Sam doesn't come clean about the whole Alcazar thing, seeing how it's destroying his brother's life, says everything you need to know about Sam Drake. He's not a good guy. One thing that is amazing though, and proves yet again how good Naughty Dog's art guys are at their job, is the facial animation. Let me remind you that they're all handmade, using the actors' performances as reference, so they're precise and realistic without getting to the uncanny valley levels of movement that you see in games that just use motion tracking for everything. The brimming tears on Elena's eyes. Mwah! Masterful work. Just masterful. I tip my hat to thee. It doesn't mean I like this scene, because it's artificial, it's fabricated. Nate acts like he hasn't been here before, like his wife hasn't been through hell and back with him, like he hasn't learned how much lies and obsessions can cost him. He's acting like a guy who's not been through the past 10 years of experiences. Take Uncharted 3, for example. In it, Nate's priorities shift from going after the things he was obsessing with to keeping his loved ones safe. He even has a moment where he's not sure about going after Morrow because it would mean putting Sully in danger again. When he heads to the Rubal Kali, he stops Elena from following him, but is honest with her about his motives. This is a similar situation, if not exact. He needs to save his brother. Why couldn't he tell his wife, I need to go do this, but I need you to stay behind because I need you to be safe? It reminds me of Alan Tudyk's words, y'all making some weird changes. So true. The next scene proves Sam is a bastard even more. Nathan is sulking, but Sam is grinning, and he gets them beers to enjoy the trip, and even tells Nate, oh, she'll get over it. Nate says, maybe not this time. Maybe he's done this one too many times. I refuse to beat this horse anymore. I refuse to beat this horse anymore. I refuse to beat this horse anymore. No, I will continue beating on this dead horse until the end of days. They reach their destination. It's not a really huge island. It's kind of tiny, meaning yet again, this is not Libertalia, this is another clue. They joke about it, saying that maybe Libertalia is a shack on the beach, that maybe Avery ran out of money making all these elaborate clues. And if that's the case, they both better find a good place to hide. The clues lead to a tower, which leads to an underground arrow pointing somewhere else, and after a roundabout journey around these tiny aisles and another puzzle, and pulling a lever, they are back to the same damn tower, but with a giant statue of Avery popping out of the ground with him very much pointing in the direction of the actual island where Libertalia resides. Subtlety is not Avery's forte, apparently, and Sam comments that maybe Avery was a bit of a narcissist. Along the way, they also find what seems like a workshop, with city and building plans and dioramas and murals about the founding of Libertalia. It's a pretty cool room, one of the better examples of visual storytelling in the Uncharted series. And having done the whole job for them, this is where Shoreline comes in, and we're suddenly back to the opening scene of the game, which, if you remember, ends up with them capsizing. Nathan drifts ashore later that night. His gear is gone, and so is Sam. So he's got no other recourse but to make his way inland, following the cliffs and taking out some shoreline patrols, freeing up even more of Nadine's operational budget. Maybe that's why Shoreline is still on this contract, and still partners with Rafe. Nate is inadvertently helping with the downsizing. Corporations love this kind of stuff, but Nadine's company has so many skeletons in the closet that she just doesn't want to fire them. She wants to permanently get rid of them. Makes perfect sense now. The climb over the cliffs brings a new tool to Nate's arsenal, a piton, a climbing peg, which helps in climbing over very specifically textured walls, which reminds me a bit of Soul Reaver and its very specific walls you can climb. Past Nadine's now former employees and formerly living, Nate finds a body with a letter on him. Remember how I said we'd be hearing of the Burns family again? With Joseph Burns being the owner of the original St. Dismas Cross? Well, this letter is from an explorer who got betrayed and fatally shot by Jonathan Burns, Joseph's kid, wanting Avery's treasure all for himself. And that's when the Drake brothers reunite. Sam is excited, Nate is not. Nate tries to get his brother to agree to at least secure a boat or their exit, or to even acknowledge that maybe the entire colony thing is not real, since they haven't found an inch of it. But Sam is not having it, saying he'll scour the island until he finds it, sounding a lot like Rafe in Scotland, because they're very much the same, both awful. Sam tells Nate that if he's having doubts, he can just go home, and that sets Nate off, considering all his risk losing for this. Sam tries to use the "I was locked away for 15 years" card yet again, but Nate says this has nothing to do with that. And here is where Sam's mask slips a bit when he snaps back that it has everything to do with it. Remember at the beginning when he told Nate he didn't blame him for staying locked up? Turns out that may not have been the truth. Shocking, isn't it? This is a second scene I hate, because it looks like we're finally getting the big blowout between the brothers that the entire thing has been building towards. But just as it's getting good, Nate suddenly notices the basically "Welcome to Libertalia" plaque, and the entire discussion is forgotten. After crossing a couple of dilapidated houses, they come out to what Nate describes as a commercial district, Libertalia. They found it, and they explore it a bit, all of it optional. Just there you want to take a look and hear some snippets of conversation, such as their surprise on seeing a prison, and realizing that in any group, there's always a few trying to ruin it for everybody. And of course, you can get them to sit down in what was once a pub, where they talk about the place, a moment of reflection. Yet that big conversation but before is not revisited at all. As they continue, they find an underground secret base of some kind, with a diagram or plans on all the routes into the treasury, possibly planning an attack. Past this and another group of shoreline soldiers, they come to an administration building, and just outside is the path to the treasury, where they find dozens of bodies and barricades. There was a revolt here. The people stormed the treasury, dying in droves, but eventually making it inside and writing "thief" on the portraits of the founders, with the treasury picked clean of its riches, though the brothers do find a gold coin, implying that they had melted the gold and minted their own currency, pirate dollars. But more importantly, it seems that the founders made off with everyone's gold. Turns out the great promise of Libertalia was an empty one, a scam. But then again, they're all pirates, so they should have seen this coming. Looking up, Sam realizes where the money is. The top of the treasury is a dome, and on it is a map of Libertalia, same as how in Scotland the map of Madagascar was also on the top of the dome. They can see the treasury building on it, and further up there's New Devon, named after Avery's birthplace. It's the rich district of Libertalia, where the founders had their homes. They leave the treasury and climb a tower to get their bearings, but Shorelines found them, and finally they seem to be playing for keeps, pulling out the rocket launchers, completely obliterating the tower and forcing the Drakes to scramble to safety. At the end of the road, Nate jumps through a window and Nadine is magically there, clocking him in the chin the moment he steps through. She disarms him, throws him to the ground, and then pulls her gun and does nothing. Wasn't she supposed to be the one in the Rafe partnership who's about removing problems? She steps on him, and Nate, like a responsible adult, uses his safe word, which leaves Nadine very confused and not at all amused. It's really a tough crowd for Nate's comedy routine. Nadine just keeps blabbing, giving Sam enough time to jump in and make the save, toppling her and forcing her to drop the gun. One interesting point is that Nate offers for them to work together, and she scoffs. Trust a Drake? Which is the only indication in the entire game that Nadine has prior Drake dealing experience, before the scene right after this one reveals the whole deal. This is the problem. They need the characters to stay alive, but haven't given Nadine any convincing reason not to put a bullet in them the moment they meet. This scene, if Nadine acted with the priorities we've been told she has, she would have started with a punch, the disarm, then drop him to the ground, and then Nate would have gotten a full magazine to the face. You know how they say, show don't tell? This game tells you a lot, then shows you something entirely different that ruins the characters. This leads to a little face-off between them, with Nate shocked that she's getting ready to fight them both. Nate says you might be a badass, but it's 2 against 1. Then she says the dumbest line in the game. My men are coming. I just need to distract you, if I don't take you out myself. Nathan and his brother have erased most of her men from existence. This is not a threat. They're just atrocious at their job, and she's a terrible leader. This kicks off another heavily scripted sequence with Nadine, where she holds both of them off. You get prompts to mash buttons to escape her grabs, but they don't matter. They're therefore, yet again, the illusion of control. Nadine is supposed to be so good that she can fight 2 guys without, at any point, committing to really taking them out. She chokes Nate for a bit, not enough to cause some damage, and then throws him to the ground before turning to go after Sam, instead of, stomping on Nate's head or deal some significant injury to stop him from immediately getting up. Maybe even kicking him in the family jewels a few times. It's only near the end that she seems to be doing a proper job when she kicks Nate out a window. But he comes back and punches Nadine and Sam through the rotten floor, and the Drakes land in a heap near the edge of a cliff, with Nadine's gun conveniently near them. Nate scrambles for it, but Nadine kicks him, giving Sam the chance to grab it instead and use it to hold Nadine at bay. And here is where Rafe and a couple of shoreliners show up. Sam threatens them to drop their weapons, holding the gun to Nadine's head, but Rafe says no. Nadine even says that Sam's on edge, but Rafe is calmer and more collected here than ever before, and just says don't worry about Sam. The Drakes don't kill anyone in cold blood, calling their bluff, and even Nate is telling Sam to drop the gun. Here's the thing, they don't kill in cold blood is not at all accurate. Given that you snap the neck of a whole lot of people when doing stealth, and you can start shooting and killing enemies before they see you, Nate's body count is so extensive that they don't kill blood is so inaccurate that it borders on delusional. Nate moves to Sam and grabs his arm before he can pull the trigger, the gun firing into the sky, with Rafe surprised, not thinking Sam had it in him. Nate holds his hands in the air, and the shoreliners look like they're about to fire, but Rafe stops them, then proceeds to beat Samuel. Nate tries to negotiate, asking just for a cut to save poor Samuel from Alcazar. And then Rafe tells him the thing that they should have figured out many moons ago. Alcazar's been dead for 6 months at least, in a shootout in Argentina. You know, the kind of thing that usually makes the round on the news and would definitely show up on a Google search. Rafe then tells Nathan he got Sam out. No breakout, no muss, no fuss, he walked out of the main door. And again, and I know Rafe has apparently more money than God, but Nathan couldn't find a single damn thing about Sam still being alive or in prison. And yet Rafe heard he was alive 15 years later. Seriously. Sounds like a stretch to me. What they should have done instead is say that Sam got moved to a different prison. And that's why there were no records of him when Nate called. And it takes someone like Rafe who can just pay a bunch of money to just say, find him wherever he is, to get to him. It's a minor change that would make the whole thing make more sense. Rafe just keeps talking, saying that for the past 2 years, he and Sam were working together. Nate refuses to believe him, but Sam doesn't refute it. And his reasons for all his actions, for all the lies, is Avery's treasure is ours. Trying to sound reasonable despite how insane it is, given all that Nathan was sacrificing, which the younger Drake points out, pushing his brother back. Rafe says that if it's any consolation, Sam did the same thing to him, disappeared and brought Nate and Sully into this whole thing. Sam tells Rafe he doesn't deserve it, with Rafe pointing out that they're all thieves, no better than one another. And I gotta give it to Rafe here. He's making sense. Only problem is that he's still talking. Even Nadine chimes in going, please, one way or another, end it, or I will. And sorry, lady, you've been as ineffectual at killing them as the rest of your company and your partner. Nobody in this game so far that stated they're gonna kill the Drakes actually pulled the trigger when they had them at their mercy. Which of course makes it so there's never any dramatic tension, even in this moment. Back to the story, Nate tries one last attempt to prevent them from getting shot, saying Rafe needed them, so he wouldn't keep hitting dead ends. Rafe says he's half right. He only needs one Drake, and goes to shoot him. But Sam steps in the way, gets hit in the shoulder, and pushes Nate off a cliff, meaning Sam is better at trying to kill his brother than all of the villains combined. But I'll give this to Rafe, he actually pulled the trigger. It's more than Nadine, the professional killer, ever did. Nate falls down to the river below, and these rivers aren't exactly deep, so that fall would likely have killed him. Not to mention he busts his head on a rock on the way down. But it's Nate. He survives it all and washes out downriver. For all the notion of this game being more centered in realism, they end up being far more cartoonish than the Uncharted titles that came before. Nate's unconscious on the riverbed, blood seeping into the muddy water, and suddenly, magically, Elena is right there. The island is pretty huge, and even though Elena would later say she followed the sound of the explosions, it's still a stretch that she found him. But before we get to that, Nate has one final flashback, to the same night from the opening section, the place where they would find their mother's things, the museum-like mansion of Evelyn, a retired explorer, colleague, and friend of their mother's. She's the one who bought their things. They stumble around the place like a pair of idiots, making a whole lot of noise. They also take the Polaroid that we see in the opening sections of the game, the photo that Nate refused to properly look at. They finally stumble upon their mother's things, but before they can take it, in comes Evelyn, barely breathing, barely walking, but holding a gun on them with the police on their way. She thinks they're thieves, but they manage to explain that it's their mother's things, and Evelyn tells them that Cassandra Morgan was one of the most gifted historians she ever met, giving us a name for their mother and the original last name for Nathan and Sam, before they became who they are now. Unfortunately for the boys, when the cops arrive and before she can explain everything to them, she has a heart attack and dies, forcing the kids to scramble the hell out of Dodge. Later, we see them at the docks, making plans for the future, taking the name Drake in honor of their mother's research about Sir Drake and his heirs, which apparently was a regular dinner conversation at their house. Nate is not exactly on board, but Sam has it all planned out. They'll change their names, go as far as they can, and do great things together. Sam even says he always knew they were destined for more. The same delusion of grandeur that leads him to claim Avery's treasure was meant for them. Back in the present, Nate is telling this story to Elena, how after they left they became explorers, adventurers, but mostly just thieves. And with Nate mentioning they both took turns going to jail or when they're together, we know how Nathan ended up in Cartagena on his own. Nate says that after he lost Sam, or thought he did, he just never brought him up again. And while it sounds reasonable, I still find it very strange, especially with the box they had at home with those old things. It was out in the open. Not to mention that they likely talked about their lives. I mean, my mom and dad told stories of their lives. So you'd think at some point it would have come up. But fine, I'll retract my statement on the mystery of the existence of Sam and accept that Nate simply never said a damn thing about it, nor did Sully. Elena says it's a lot to take in, but she's just happy she found him and he wasn't missing any parts. When he asks how she got here, she takes out a walkie and we hear Sully speaking, asking how Nate is doing, alive but banged up as usual. Now they have to get to the other Drake, and passing the talking to Nathan, he speaks to Sully with a very soft tone. Probably still ashamed he snapped at the only person, aside from his wife, who's had his back and didn't screw him over. He tells Sully to go north and find a place to land, because they'll need to run away as soon as they have Sam, and that the whole Alcazar thing was nonsense. Nathan thanks Elena for saving him again, and she says a line I still struggle to believe. I almost didn't this time. That just doesn't sound like Elena. As angry as she might be, she's not the kind of person or partner to consider, even for a second, not helping. This woman is a saint, a badass one, as established by all the other games in the series. In Uncharted 3, there's palpable tension and maybe some bitterness between she and Nate, as they were clearly separated, maybe even divorced. And still, when he returns from the magical cruise ride, she hugs him, worried sick about what happened to him. So this notion that she would now consider leaving her husband to die is laughable, and a further example that these writers did not really know these characters. It almost feels like Uncharted 4 is an alternate history, like a different timeline altogether. But with all that said, we now kick off what is consistently the best bit in any Uncharted: Nate and Elena together. The chemistry between Nolan North and Emily Rose is the best, even if the conversations are strained as hell, with Nate trying to make small talk as they walk, and Elena only replying. She saw the colony but was too busy finding him, and yes, Sully explained the whole deal with Libertalia. And if the complex puzzle machines weren't impressive enough, Avery's engineers built actual elevators, water-wheeled powered elevators for cargo, and most impressive of all, they're still working 300 years after their creation, much to Nathan's surprise. Eventually, and after sending even more shoreliners to their next lives, they make it to a jeep, one that Elena liberated from their forces. With the jeep, they head upriver towards New Devon. Elena asks the important question: why does Rafe want the treasure? And Nate says because he wants the glory. It's not about the money. He doesn't need that. But he doesn't want to only be a guy whose success or fortune comes from his inheritance. In other words, he wants to rid himself of the Nepo baby status. Though I'd say he's not realizing the fact that it's only because he's a Nepo baby that he can afford the endless fortune to spend years going after the treasure and hiring his own army. So even if he succeeds, he still won't get what he wants. But that's a level of logic Rafe can't fathom. Elena then explains a bit more of the Shoreline and Rafe relationship. Nadine inherited a mess of a company, her father having taken them into a couple of civil wars that ended poorly for them. And yet, that makes it worse that she's taken this deal. Again, the mere mention of Nathan Drake being even remotely involved in this, even potentially, would be a risk too high to take when you're already in the red. There are better and easier jobs for a PMC to do that won't involve 90% of your forces dying to Mr. Hero Protagonist. Again, This just makes Nadine come off as profoundly incompetent. In the distance, they see an even bigger elevator, one that likely will fit their brand new car. Nate says Elena could definitely write a killer article about all this, and Elena agrees but doubts anyone would believe it, and she didn't bring her camera to get evidence. I could point out that they have used smartphones in this game, and she could just have brought it and snap a pic or two, but I won't. And here we come to the part that annoys me to no end. Elena wonders why Sam didn't go to Nate the moment Rafe got him out. Nathan replies that he likely wanted to get everything Rafe had, every clue, and come up with the Alcazar story. And then he says, if only I'd looked it up. Yeah, if only anyone in this plot had looked it up. Just because you mention it now does not excuse it being wholly illogical that no one Googled Alcazar. Lampshading doesn't excuse bad writing. In this case, it only highlights it. They reach another elevator, not the giant one, but another cargo lift. They manage to get it going, but Nathan ends up outside of it, fighting off more shoreline forces, while Elena's inside the cage-like lift, along with the Jeep. This is a pretty hard shootout, or at least I found it difficult, because enemies come from different directions and altitudes, and yet, they're simply not good enough at their jobs. The last dude should have run, headed to Nadine and said, I quit. This is not worth the money. Once at the top, they continue their journey, and if the Kings Bay level wasn't enough of a beautifully crafted landscape, then this one will surely blow your mind. It's gorgeous and colorful. Eventually, they do reach the giant elevator, put the car inside, and get it going. The ride up offering them a chance to have a heart-to-heart. Nate wants to know what made her change her mind and come over. She replies he was clearly in over his head, and there's also those pesky wedding vows. She tells him that even if he wants to protect her, he's supposed to talk to her, so they can solve it together. And Nate stammers, can't find the words to explain his reasoning, which to me just feels like bad TV. The cliche husband scared to admit his selfishness. Like he can't bring himself to be vulnerable, except that's also one of the things Uncharted 3's Elena and Nate plot was all about. This is why sometimes I feel this is an alternate history. In-universe, only 3 years have passed since Uncharted 3. You're telling me this dude regressed that much in his maturity and the confidence in their relationship in that time? Please. The road to New Devon takes them further up the mountain and finally to a bridge towards the gates. A bridge that cannot handle the weight of the Jeep and Nate's reverse Midas touch. So, of course, it crumbles under them, sending them to the river below, heading for the edge of a cliff and the waterfall that powered the lift. Lena manages to jump up to safety first, but Nate ends up going over the edge with the car, grappling onto a branch and swinging to safety. And hey, it turns out a brush with death is just what Nate needs to finally open up to his wife, meaning that in the future, Elena should bring throwing knives to every discussion. He admits he wasn't protecting her. He broke his promise to stay out of this life, and he lied as he was afraid of losing her. So he was protecting himself. And Elena's expression is either confusion or Emily Rose thinking that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But Elena just changes the topic, saying they have lots of ground to cover. And that ground is littered in bodies, mass graves of the colonists, probably the insurgents, same as those found outside the treasury. And the gates of New Devon aren't any better. Dozens of bodies in cages labeled traitor, and even more bodies at the foot of those cages. Lena wonders if this was always the plan, lure a bunch of people here and then rob them blind, which she says, and I agree, is pretty damn diabolical even for pirates. New Devon is astounding. It's manor after manor after manor, each more decadent than the last, but the entire place is flooded and damaged, and evidence you find suggests the captains turned on one another, their mansions having cannons deployed and aiming at each other's properties, and threatening notes are found across the area, such as Baldrige promising once some swift retribution. And it's not the only conflict going on here, as you encounter more shoreline soldiers along the way, and you send them on their merry way to meet Davy Jones. On the far end is the only intact manor, Avery's, and entering the area they see through binoculars that Rafe has Sam at gunpoint, pushing him inside the house, with Nadine and some of her men coming along. In Thomas 2's mansion, they find a banquet hall with the dead founders of Libertalia, all except Avery and 2. They gather them here for a discussion, to restore unity, or so they thought. In truth, they came here to die, poisoned by the other 2 pirates. Nate pieces it together, that is struck by the sight. The greatest pirates in history, all gathered here and dead in an instant. He then turns to Elena and apologizes. No excuses, just, I'm sorry. Elena tells him it's okay. Next step is Avery's, where one massive shootout with Shoreline awaits, bringing back the minigun lads from Uncharted 2. Not that they're in any way effective. Shoreline soldiers are proven to be useless. Heavy guns or no, but it's a valiant effort. Still, they end up like the colonists and the pirates, bodies for future travelers to find. Avery's study has a secret switch that opens a hidden staircase leading them down to the caves under Avery's manor, where the captain's insanity is in full display. Mummified bodies filled with explosives, bones of different body parts hanging, hands of thieves, ribcage for the hearts that turned against them. It's a strange underground vindictive charnel house. I will say though, the proximity mine mummies are a bit of a stretch. These things have fuses that light up the moment you come close to them. It's a bit much, and makes this section truly annoying, because they're used not only a lot, but too much. One thing they find in these catacombs is a letter from 2 to his lieutenants, warning him of Avery's traps and that they have to go get him, proving that even 2 and Avery became enemies in the end. When they reach the exit, a giant metal door, they trigger a trap and a net rises from below them, leaving them hanging. So they have to swing back and forth, grab a saber stuck to another poor guy, and cut themselves free to make it through the door before the igniting conga line of explosive Emoteps blows them to bits. Again, it's a bit much. Worse still, there are also Shoreline guys in here, and honestly, this is one of the enemy placements I find weird. Like a bunch of soldiers stuck around in these deadly caves? For what? Waiting on Nate? It's a bit of a stretch. The kind of thing that is purely there for game challenge rather than making any logical sense. The end of that perilous road leaves them on their back, and after a few more explosions, Nate finds Elena unresponsive. He panics, trying to wake her up, and without opening her eyes, she says, "My hero." A little payback. Nate doesn't find it funny, tells her she almost gave him a heart attack. She lays her head on his chest and says, "Nah, sounds good to me." Nate tries to use this to claim they're now even, but Elena says not even close. But they both start laughing, getting closer, and Nate quotes Sully from the first Uncharted game. "Anyone ever told you you have a funny idea of romantic?" They kiss, make up, and Nate says, "Good talk," referencing the scene on their sofa earlier in the game. But before they can fully make out, explosions remind them there's still a game to finish. They come to what looks like a ship graveyard, and there's Sam, pinned down by what's likely the remainder of Nadine's payroll, up to and including another one of those armored gun cars, which meets the same fate, only this time with a timely assist from Sully, tossing you some RPGs to take it out. The full party reunites, Sam approaching, looking like a kid who knows he's in trouble. They have a little brotherly small talk, discussing injuries and how Sam got away from Rafe. Sam tries to broach the subject of Alcazar, but Nate tells him there's time for that later. Then with Sully and Elena turn to head for his plane, to get the hell out of here, and Sam's confused, not understanding what's going on. Sully explains it, and Sam suggests taking another route, which is a shortcut to Avery's treasure. Sully says no. Sam says they're all here for this, for the treasure, but Elena tells him they're here for him, for Sam. He even tries to convince Nathan, showing him Avery's map of the island, where it says that the ship, the Fancy, is under the very scary-looking mountain in the distance. Sully asks, what if the ship is not there, and it's sunk somewhere in the ocean? And to prove the depths of Sam's obsession, which is far more delusional than Nathan ever was in any of the past games, he says, then we find where it sank and look for it there, which makes Sully give up and step away. Sam tries one more time to convince Nate, telling him they have to go, just the two of them, that the other two don't get it. It's Sam trying an us versus them tactic. It's manipulation. kind of the same style that Chloe used in Uncharted 2, where she constantly tried to get Nate to lose the dead weight of Elena and Jeff. Rest in peace, Jeff. But the problem for Sam is that things have finally gone too far, and Nate says no. That Sully and Elena do understand, because they have seen this obsession before. He tells his brother they're not kids anymore, not those kids looking for glory. They have nothing to prove. Sam looks like he wants to argue, or that he can't believe what Nate is saying, but he bites it down and asks Sully where the plane is. But we all know he's not about to give up. So while at first it seems like he's playing ball and helping them get to the plane, at the end he bails on them to run towards the treasure. Nate, Sully, and Elena try to pursue, but the only way is over a tall gate. And two people need to stay behind to hold the cart that is going to serve as a platform to reach the top. So in the end, Nate has to leave them behind to go after his brother. Only this time with their blessing, more or less. And it's a blessing he would have had from the get-go had he spoken to Elena when Sam first showed up. And yeah, I know I promised not to beat this dead horse anymore, but come on, give me one more before the game ends. Nate rushes after Sam but can't catch up to him. He's got a significant lead. Nate looks over a cliff and is happy that Sam didn't fall to his death, so he still has a chance to kill his big brother himself. The trek takes him over and through mountains, and because he's Nathan Drake, it involves a bunch of bad falls that would have killed anyone else. But as he's swimming down a passage, he surfaces under a pier and hears Nadine and Rafe talking, with Nadine finally pulling out, something a smart leader would have done like 7 chapters ago. They also see Sam steal one of their boats, but Nadine doesn't look like she cares anymore. Nadine tells Rafe most of her people are dead, and the ones who aren't already left, meaning that despite any other evidence to the contrary, there actually are shoreliners who aren't complete suicidal idiots trying desperately to kill Nathan, the Angel of Death Drake. Rafe keeps trying to convince her, but Nadine is not having it anymore. So he says no wonder so many of her men left. And honestly, I'm kinda with him. But it's not her determination to find the treasure that likely caused those resignations. It's sending them in waves after Nathan Wick. Nadine, venom in her voice, replies that if Sam can get to the ship safely and grab something from it without dying to Avery's insane traps, then he deserves to get it. Hell, he deserves it more than Rafe. He doesn't like that comment, so he slaps her, which would be suicidal in 99.999% of cases. But to prove that some shoreliners aren't that smart, they raise their guns to Nadine after she decks Rafe, having switched bosses. Rafe points out the obvious, that mercenary loyalties are bought, not earned. But you know, a mercenary who switches bosses on the fly is not a mercenary who's gonna see a lot of business. It's unprofessional. So Nadine ends up going onto the ship with Rafe, coerced at gunpoint. As Nate reaches the ship, an explosion rocks the cave, a chunk of the ship blowing apart, and the inside is on fire and a shoreliner dead. Yet every surface is covered in gold. And here we come to the final boss fight. Nathan steps into the hold or the treasure room, not sure. There's gold coins everywhere, even more treasures hanging on nets. Smoke fills the room and Sam is pinned under a wooden beam. Rafe steps out of the smoke, gun in hand, and both men raise their guns at each other. Nathan just wants his brother and tells Rafe that he can have the treasure, but Rafe disagrees. Nate points out that if they stay, they're all dead. Rafe says that's not the plan and talks to Nadine behind Nate. She takes Nate's gun, but as Rafe steps closer to her, she points her gun at him and takes his gun as well. Rafe, like an idiot, tries to step to her, but she fires a warning shot. She tells him to look at the 2 skeletons on the floor. Rafe is dismissive, proving that he really doesn't know anything or cares for that matter, even after all these years after the treasure. After all, he didn't piece together the clues. He only found them after someone else did the job. But Nate does recognize them. It's Avery and 2, and they killed each other. Rafe doesn't really understand the point Nadine is trying to make, so she spells it out. Everyone obsessed with this treasure gets what they deserve, implying death, of course. And we have about 1,000 bodies strewn across the island as evidence that this is actually true. Nadine locks them inside and leaves, presumably taking the boat that Sam used, as the other one likely has the big Bob soldier that turned on her and who makes a return in Lost Legacy. Rafe pounds on the door, then realizing he can't open it, he fully snaps, takes one of the cutlasses, and says he won't be able to enjoy any of these coins as long as the Drakes still live. A fight starts, and it's Rafe with a sword versus Nate unarmed, and it's a quick-time event fight, choosing to dodge left or right while listening to Rafe whine about Nathan's many accomplishments, proving that his entire motivation wasn't just the Nepo baby thing. It's all jealousy. Jealousy that Nathan has accomplished so much, someone without all his resources. He even says Nate is nothing, has nothing, and calls him and his brother two-bit thieves. He even admits to killing someone who said that Nathan Drake was a legend. Finally, Nate draws his own saber, and the Monkey Island sword fight can finally begin. And it's the same damn thing. Just parry left or right, creating openings where Nate primarily punches and kicks Rafe instead of, stabbing him. Only when the fight draws out, and trust me, it drags on, does Nate cut Rafe a few times, but mostly it's just punches and kicks. It's not the most exciting fight, but it's not the worst. That honor goes to Lost Legacy. Rafe drops Nathan to the floor and disarms him. But before he can finish his enemy off, Sam tosses the blade back to his brother, who blocks until the blade breaks, while Rafe continues to complain about how it was all handed to him and that this is the first thing he's really earned, which he didn't, not really. From the ground, Nate looks up and sees Rafe is standing just below one of the hanging piles of treasure, so he cuts the rope and drops it on him. He tries to get Sam out, but the beam is too heavy. Sam tells him to go, that it's fine, but Nate's not about to do that, so instead he grabs a cannon, points it down, and fires, flooding the entire hold, meaning the beam can now be moved more easily, and the brothers can swing to safety and rejoin Elena right before the cave fully collapses. Sully picks them up and they fly away, but Sam's eyes are still glued to that mountain, looking sad, while Nate just looks tired. Back in Madagascar, I suppose? On a pier, Sam and Elena are chatting, with Sam telling her embarrassing stories of Nate's childhood, including his stint as a magician. Nathan and Sully have their own little talk. Sully offers to fly them, but Nate says he wants an airplane with drinks and reclining seats, and the time and space to talk things out with Elena, but promises Sully they'll grab beers when he comes to visit. Elena and Sam hug, and the older Drake whispers to her to take care of his brother. Elena grabs Nate's bag and walks towards their taxi, leaving the two Drakes to talk. Nate tells Sam that he can come with them, but Sam won't. He's dealing with a sense of emptiness after all that happened. And Nate tells him that happens with every adventure. It doesn't change. You just gotta eventually figure out what you want to keep and what you let go. Sam's not there yet. Besides, he needs to catch up to Nate on the number of ancient cities they found. They have one parting hug and Nate leaves, with Sam going to Sully and basically asking to join his next scheme. A reverse of the Uncharted 2 ending where Sully went after Chloe. This time, he's the one being pursued. He's the belle of the ball. Back in New Orleans, Jameson tells Nate he's selling the business to him. Turns out Sam did pocket some pirate coins, he just put them in Elena's jacket. With the cash, she bought out Jameson Marine and even got the Malaysia permits. So their new business ventures to go after salvages and explore, but now fully legal. And that's the start of DNF Fortunes, Drake and Fisher. And it's not only that, Elena also got some camera gear, and the plan is to use the salvages to resurrect her old show, likely meaning Discovered. A show that is not mentioned anywhere in the games, but does appear in Elena's backstory in Uncharted Drake's Fortunes strategy guide. It's the show that launched her career. Nathan looks confused and wants to know what happened to having a normal life. Elena says they kinda went overboard and became too normal. Almost like the writers made them like this just to create all this drama. When these two people could never be normal for more than 5 minutes. Hell, Elena's never been normal. But whatever. Elena says that if he's not on board, they'll cancel the whole thing. But no, he's on board. And they continue to chit-chat as the camera moves away. the scene shifts to someone playing Crash Bandicoot, and in this instance, you can break Elena's record. This is Cassie, Cassandra Drake, Elena and Nathan's kid. She's at home and they live on a beach in a really nice house that I wish I had for myself. She's looking for her parents, waiting for them to return. Along with her is the family dog, Vicky, named after Victor Sullivan, a beautiful Labrador retriever. Druckmann conceived of Nathan's child as a boy originally, but apparently when introducing the character to the lead concept artist, they asked, "Why don't we make it a girl?" Druckmann thought about it, realized it didn't impact the story in any way, so they went with it. Cassie looks for her parents everywhere around the house and even finds letters from Sully and Sam, who are still traipsing around the world together, or as I like to call it, they've become platonic life partners. Eventually, she makes her way to their study or workshop. There are plans for their next expeditions everywhere, and magazine covers framed with new discoveries made by DNF Fortunes. In the back of the workshop, she finds a locked closet, but the keys are nearby, and inside is a whole lot of incriminating evidence of all their adventures, including a photo of Nate, Elena, and Sully over crates of treasure, with Nate holding an AK-47. So of course, when Nate and Elena choose that moment to show up, she asks questions, and the game ends with them walking towards the beach to go sailing, while Nate explains everything about their journey for El Dorado, and I'm hoping he's also telling her about the extensive body count. And so ends the main Uncharted series. And as you could tell, I have many issues with the writing. It's not a bad game, but I lament the game it could have been. One with a team of writers that know these characters and respect their journey, and didn't just choose to forget it all for some cheap melodrama. But this is not the end of this retrospective. We have one more step, one more destination. So join me next time on one more quest. One that will take us to India and learn what actually happened to Nadine, as she and Chloe get up to no good in Uncharted: The Lost Legacy.